And Trump's new demands come as NATO starts hardening its western border after Russia flew those drones over Poland this week, as Betsy was just discussing there. Let's bring in CNN senior military analyst Admiral James Stavridis. He's also the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and a partner at the investment firm, the Carlyle Group. Thank you so much, Admiral, for being here with us. Let's start first with what we just heard from Marco Rubio there, calling this unacceptable, unfortunate, dangerous. He says they're trying to ascertain were these drones targeted, and what might that mean if they were. I'm curious from your perspective and your experience, if that turns out to be the case, what happens next?
Secretary Rubio is absolutely correct. This is, in my view, a significant escalation on the part of the Kremlin. It's hard to imagine how that number of drones could mistakenly drift off course. One, maybe two, probably 24 came in, many shot down by NATO defenses. So significant escalation. In terms of what happens next, Jessica, I think the president is right to say we've got to continue the economic pressure. I would add it is time to consider seriously 2 additional military pressure points. One would be to give the Ukrainians more offensive weapons that can strike longer and give them targeting information to go after drone production facilities in Russia. And number 2, more controversially, would be for NATO to seriously consider a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Those 2 things would get the Kremlin's attention.
And how likely do you think that is?
I think it is unlikely to happen in the immediate future, but the more we talk about it, the more NATO plans for it, the more NATO trains. What would a no-fly zone look like over Ukraine? Something that my successor as Supreme Allied Commander at NATO is highly qualified to consider. He's an Air Force combat pilot. And I think additionally, the president is right to be putting the economic pressure. And I'll close with this, Jessica. It is still surprising to me that European nations are purchasing hydrocarbons from Russia. You mentioned Turkey. It's also Hungary and Slovakia. And by the way, natural gas, the United States can export all the natural gas Europe needs. So we ought to do the economic pressure, but also bring in the military steps I mentioned.
Yeah, and so on that question of this ultimatum from President Trump with NATO allies about stopping their purchase of Russian oil, do you think they will be amenable to that?
I think they will. And the more the United States pressurizes, the better. And this means that the conversations need to really get started in Brussels to get this done. And by the way, let's point out that the vast majority of Russian oil and gas is no longer purchased by Europe. But there's still some holdouts. The president is right to call those out. At the same time, we're going to need not only that economic package, but also those sanctions, particularly against China. And finally, I think we need to look at confiscation of Russian resources, their assets that are held in European banks in Brussels. Jessica, about $300–400 billion at this point. We need both economic and military tools to get the attention of Vladimir Putin.
And Admiral, we have a new clip. President Zelensky sat down with our colleague Fareed Zakaria in Kyiv yesterday at the Yalta European Strategy Conference. I want to listen to this. It's a bit of it's a couple minutes. So let's listen to what they said, and then I do want to get your reaction to the other side.
You've mentioned the Russian drones in Poland several times. Do you think NATO failed? What should NATO have done to respond to that attack?
I do not believe, I don't think that NATO has failed. Everywhere where NATO is present, there is no war. So we understand that there's a strong alliance, strong allies. It's simply that I believe that now, when there are such signals coming to NATO countries, and let's be honest, during this war, there were no such massive attacks. on the territory of NATO countries. But there were cases with Romania and Poland. So it's not the first time. I simply believe that there must be a response to him. The signals, we don't say here that NATO must use this or that weapon. Nobody wants to expand the war. Nobody is talking about that. At least, I'm not the one to talk about that. We're not a NATO member. We're simply warning, and we're saying that strong answers are needed, strong response. For example, we'll give Ukraine certain weapons that Ukraine never had. Why? Because there are drones flying and Ukrainians cannot down them, and some of them land on NATO countries' territories. So we'll give Ukrainians the weapons that they have asked all along, and that weapon will hit not the drones, but the facilities, factories where those drones are being produced. It's not about NATO, it's about Ukraine. That's it.
Admiral, listening to you, I hope you could hear President Zelensky there. But what did you think about what he had to say?
It's exactly what I said at the top of this interview. They need longer range weapons to go after drone production facilities, drone staging areas, the fuel depots for the drones. Those are smart targets. You're not attacking civilians. You're knocking down a threat. And at this point, those drones are a threat quite clearly, not just to Ukraine, but to NATO. So I think the Article 4 consultations that are occurring right now in Brussels ought to take all that into account, provide those weapons, and I would add to it, as I mentioned, plan for a no-fly zone. That would be the next step. All of that needs to be on the table if collectively we're going to stop Vladimir Putin.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Great seeing you, Jessica.